Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr. D.Z. Cofield. The show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, DZ Cofield, and I want to welcome you to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, your community station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial in the Houston metro area, and KTSUradio.com on the World Wide Web. And of course, I want to encourage you to remember that membership is 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can become a member of KTSU by simply texting the word member, MEMBER, to 713-313-4354. That's 713-313-4354. And you can become a member of the Choice family. Remember, there's no public radio without the public, and that's you. Now, we've got a great show planned for you on today. Before we get started, though, let me take care of a couple of housekeeping matters. If you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on IG, on Instagram, at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Twitter at DZ Cofield. And you can follow me on Facebook at, you guessed it, DZ Cofield. I'm super excited to have our guest on today, because I believe her story is going to be not only informational, but inspirational. For somebody who may be struggling, it's always a positive thing to hear a testimony from someone who has successfully overcome obstacles in life. And this sister has overcome some major obstacles to be what by any metric we would deem to be successful in life. Michelle Miller is a co-host of CBS Saturday Morning. Her work regularly appears on CBS Mornings, CBS Sunday Morning, the CBS Evening News, and 48 Hours. From presidential elections to the climate crisis, her area of coverage is wide-ranging, but her reporting on social justice has been particularly groundbreaking, from her coverage of the killings of George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, and Michael Brown, the Emanuel 9 massacre in Charleston, to sexual assault allegations against Bill Cosby, Russell Simmons, and Harvey Weinstein. Miller has been at the forefront of these issues. She was the first CBS News correspondent on the ground at the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting and followed the movement to change the nation's gun laws, including the March for Our Lives protests. Her coverage has extended overseas to the refugee crisis in the Middle East, the life of Nelson Mandela, and the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. Miller's reporting has earned her several prestigious journalism awards, including an Emmy for her series of reports on the National Guard's Youth Challenge Academy, a Gracie Award for 48 Hours, Live to Tell, Trafficked, and a Murrow Award for her coverage of a daycare center standoff in New Orleans. I am so happy to welcome to Real World, Real Talk today, none other than Michelle Miller. Thank you so much, Michelle. What's going on, lady? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm talking to you. For the next 50 minutes.
There you go. We are together. We are locked and loaded. Man, I am so excited to have you on to share with us not only the book that you wrote, but really I want to talk about your life, because I think people have gone through such a difficult time, such a tough time. And many times I think one of the tricks of the enemy is to lead us to believe that we're the only ones that have gone through some difficulty, that we're the only ones that have gone through some challenging times. You wrote a book that if somebody else wrote it, I guess you would call it an expose, right? But you are telling your own story. And that's what makes it so powerful. Let's talk about belonging and what that story is all about.
Well, first, I want to thank you and all of your listeners, DZ. Do I call you Dr. DZ? Dr. Cofield?
Just
What do
don't
I
call me
call
late
you?
for dinner. We're good.
Well, I first of all, I wrote this book and I co-wrote this book. I have to be Rosemary Robotham. I could not have done it without her meticulous mining of these memories. And also, it's like we spoke about how I'm reversing the roles here. I'm a journalist. I'm used to asking the questions. And this was a real excavation because, part of me, I felt when my husband for the last 20 plus years has asked me to write a book, I said to him, Mark, my story, there's no tragedy here. It's not a rags to riches story. It's there was no immense suffering. I had a really, looking back on it, my life, I've had a blessed life. The point at which I realized that this was a story worth telling was that there are so many people who are sort of in that middle. And this is what my friends are telling me, that my story is the story of so many people who have been led down this road to feel that they're abnormal. There's something wrong with them based on the origin of their story, because their story isn't what society deems as normal.
Okay.
And so, my story of belonging stems out of this need to really feel secure in my place and to own it. So I know you want to ask me how I came to write the story. And it really is it blossomed from a story that I was asked to do out of the George Floyd social justice movement in the midst of COVID, 5 days after he was killed, where, I'm the type of person, I express my ideas. In particular, I express my lens as one lens of many in which it's important to have diversity from all aspects of in the newsroom. And so my boss said, we know you've covered social justice for the last 20 years. We want to see from your perspective where where we're headed in this moment where we're seeing everyone out on the streets. And so I did that. I went back and I mined memory and film and really told the story of all the things that I've covered, all the protests all the way back to 1992 and the unrest that started after the acquittal of the LA Four, who were shown on videotape beating Rodney King, to Trayvon Martin's trial, to the trial of the man who killed him, George Zimmerman, to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri with Michael Brown, to the Emmanuel Nine, who were gunned down while praying with a white supremacist inside their church. I went mined all these stories and kind of told this one truth of people, one, being tired of what they were seeing, wanting justice to prevail. And in this moment where everyone was paying attention at the same time, really collectively, how this really reached into everyone. And in the midst of all that, I took 15 seconds to say, born into the unrest of the 1960s, I was the product of a union between a father who adored me and a mother who to this day does not acknowledge my existence. And it's just that 15-second turn to basically say racism has impacted me all my life, which is what I led that with, was a transparency at a journalist that I think sometimes as journalists, we never turn the camera on ourselves. We just kind of give you I have a little stake in this game.
Right.
And Gayle King was the first person who it was like a notion. Wait a minute, I hit on something. She was like, wait a minute. One, I don't know. I don't think I heard you right, Michelle. And a questioning that led us off of the news. Like literally, she was almost cut off by the show being cut off. To 37 minutes after the story aired, a publisher from HarperCollins reached out and emailed me and said, I just watched, the story is incredible. It's a book and I'd like to publish it.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing that you said, because I was going to ask you, who was it that actually heard it and said, wait a minute, what did you say? So
Her
Gail
name
King.
So Gail, it started with Gail King, sort of like her reaction to what was going on. And I can't tell you the number of my colleagues who reached out to me, friends. And here's the thing, sometimes we live in a sort of silence where we don't express sometimes what we deal with. And it was an indication, well, you really haven't, even when people probed and asked, because, a mom not being around is something people do ask about, but I guess I never really mind any of those feelings, even with some of my closest friends. And I think started with Gail, but then it started too with a woman by the name of Lisa Sharkey, who was the publisher. And it's so crazy because I think about how interconnected we all are. I keep talking about this, like Kevin Bacon hit on it, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but it really is. This woman had worked with a cousin of mine in the industry, not just in the profession of journalism and broadcast journalism on television in New York City, but had helped with her documentary and a book she also had worked on. And this is, with a connection to a story of my uncle through marriage by the name of A.G. Gaston, who was the first Black millionaire, self-made millionaire in the South, who was the reason why the marches in Birmingham went the way they did, the marches in Selma went the way they did, because he owned property and motels and had money and helped to make sure that, those engines were being filled with coal or gas, or however they were fueled at the time. But I just think about that. I think like her mind was open to hearing me. And I think that, really it's a question of who is listening and who's ready to hear. And it was, or maybe it was just the way that I put it.
Yeah. But I think what's fascinating to me is you make this statement, you make this 15-second statement with no intention. You had no idea.
No.
You didn't sit down and pontificate and say, okay, let me think of a 15-second line that's going to change the world, right? Or change my life.
And literally I was hiking in the reservation and we were in lockdown, right? And I grabbed my phone and I started dictating the script into the phone. And I literally, in 5 minutes, the script was written. I cut it down and sent it to my my producer, who I actually had never, maybe I worked with her once or twice before. And she called me back. She said, "Are you sure you want to put this in there? This is really personal." And I said, I took a deep breath and I said, "Yeah, I do." And it's so, I like, if I had not put it in, you wouldn't be talking to me right now.
Yeah.
The book would not have been published. I wouldn't have written the book. All of the incredible things that have happened to me over the last 6 to 7 months since the book has been published would not have happened. And I had no intention. We do things sometimes not knowing where they'll take us, but I think I was just trying to I wanted to put an exclamation point on that story to say, each and every one of us is impacted. If you don't believe me, I'm impacted in a way that you may not necessarily see.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you who are just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more. KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial in the Houston area, and KTSUradio.com on the World Wide Web. We're talking to Michelle Miller, the award-winning journalist and co-host of CBS Saturday Morning. And in her book, Belonging, she tells the story. It's a very deep, personal story of her mother's abandonment and how the search for answers forced her to reckon with her own identity and the secrets that shaped her family for 5 decades. So one of the words that leaped out to me as I was perusing the reviews of the book and listening and hearing what people were saying in some other interviews that you did was this idea of secret. And I think all of us have those family discussions, right? Like what goes on in this house stays in this house. You know, you don't tell people your business. You don't let people know what you've been through or what you're going through. How challenging was it for you once you made that statement in another story to have somebody call you and say, or email you and say, hey, we want you to tell your story? What was the challenge at that point? Because you say your husband, Mark, and for those of you who are listening, Michelle is married to Mark Morial, the CEO and president of the Urban League, the National Urban League. What was it at that? I know you didn't necessarily want to go back to him and have him say, you know, I told you so, right? But what was it at
No,
that
I
moment?
definitely didn't want to hear that.
But what made you say, you know what? Oh, okay, maybe I do need to write my story. Maybe I do need to tell my story.
Oh gosh, it happened so fast. I remember having the conversation with the publisher, the one that I pointed out to you earlier, that my story, there's so many people whose stories are harder, deeper, far more, from tragedy to triumph than mine. And she told me, yes, but your story resonates with people. There's so many people out there who they aren't going from here to here, but from here to here. Right. And that's the birth of, and that it's ironic because I hear that people who are like successful or making their way, or people who say, you're telling our stories. We're regular people, and yet we're still carrying a lot of this. We're carrying secrets, pain. We are carrying some form of suffering. We carry it in silence because we don't think anybody else is like us. We don't think that our experiences are common. And I guess for me, I feel that there are so many people who are, one, born out of wedlock, two, are raised by individuals who aren't their mother or their father. And there's a wide berth of people like that.
Sure.
And three, whichever of those circumstances you're born into, who are made to feel as though there's something wrong with them. I mean, think of the names that we utilize to describe people who fit in those categories.
Right.
And I think for me, just normalizing the fact that a human's on the planet, no matter where they came from. And then it's in so many societies, the more that I read about, many societies that are healthy, raise children in a communal setting and not just within a nuclear family. And so this notion of the normal nuclear family that I think we have been pushing toward, believing is there's always some judgment associated with it. And I'm not saying there should or shouldn't be. What I'm saying is there are other nurturing family structures that make a difference in an individual's life, and those should be credited with doing that. And I just wanted to thank all the women and men too who were a part of my life, and some I got a chance to thank personally, and others time ran out. And I don't want people, one, not to feel appreciated because they helped raise a child, made a difference to a child or to an adult or a young teen. I think, my experiences growing up, thank goodness I had people in my life. And so I just wanted to share that because I felt it was important to kind of knock down some of the stereotypes that we have in our minds about, certain communities, and really tell a story that spoke to people who come from those places and spaces.
Yeah. So you describe your mother as a Chicana who presented as white. So she passed for white, but she was involved
Well, I don't know
with,
if she passed for white or if you see, I don't know what those circumstances were, but
okay.
based on what she told me, her family assumed from her. I'm assuming that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then she has an affair with Dr. Ross Miller, who was a married trauma surgeon and Compton's first Black city councilman, who was your father. But it wasn't until you were 22, your father has cancer, he is sick, and he tells you, go and find your mother.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the first 22 years first, because
Okay.
again, I think this is a space that a lot of people can identify with, and that is a mother, a father. You don't necessarily know them, but it's not necessary for you to know them to have a successful life. You are in a loving and nurturing environment. You don't have this person, but you may not miss what you never had. What were the first 22 years like? And then what happened when your father said you need to go find your mother? Because I'm sure that's not the first conversation you had about your mother. But at that point, he says, hey, you need to find her. Were you not interested in finding her? Were you at the place where you were like, hey, she didn't want me, so I'm good. I'm just rolling on and doing my thing. What was it that really moved you at that moment to say, okay, I need to take this seriously?
Okay, so the first 22 years of my life, I think from 0 to 5, it wasn't something that was, in my head. At the point at which kids started asking me, where's your mom? I think it was the point I realized, oh, there's something different here. When you sort of are in that space where you are made to feel like something's not right. And so I think that was about first grade. I think there was a point in my life throughout elementary school where, I was trying to find my way. I was in I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and, there were many kids who, first of all, I felt kind of like different because I was lighter than most of the kids who went.
And let me ask you this, Michelle, first, I
Mhm.
guess, so for the sake of our listening audience, when your mother had you, did she give custody of you to your father?
Yeah, she must have. She handed me over to my father, at which
Okay.
time I think I was 2 days old, and he sent me to Birmingham, Alabama, to live with my aunt Edna, who she had 5 children herself, and a husband, and was working and teaching, and she had basically a friend of hers take care of me for the first 6 months of my life.
Hmm.
And Margaret and Joyce, her daughter, and Granty, and are people I grew up with every time I went to Birmingham. But at what point in time, I think my father eventually told my grandmother around the time that Martin Luther King was assassinated that he had a child. And that's when my grandmother, Big Mama, came and collected me from Birmingham and brought me back to Los Angeles. And she raised me there.
Wow.
Until she had to move back to Birmingham to live with my aunt because she wasn't well. So the first 12 years of my life were with my grandmother, and my father was in my life but didn't live with us. And so that was an unusual scenario. Like, people on my street knew that I was raised by my grandmother. I'm sure that many of them knew my circumstances. There weren't that many children, my age on the block. And I think that, sort of, I felt alone a lot. And when I went to school, by the time I did second, third, and fourth grade, it was, I remember feeling very isolated because, I felt isolated. And by the time I was bused to other schools in the fifth and sixth grade, I really felt different because here I was, sort of in between worlds. I was, this, and we want to talk about colorism and degree. I mean, it's crazy because the swings are all over the place. Being a Black kid from South Los Angeles, being bused to schools in the San Fernando Valley, where it's mostly these formerly all white schools, and the circumstances of us busing in, and it was just a real, I mean, it wasn't a violent time, but it was certainly an uncomfortable time. And finding friendships there on both sides was really, it wasn't challenging, but really deep-rooted friendships for me didn't happen until junior high school and college. And I had really like one true friend in the 5th grade and 6th grade. I really discovered that whatever life I wanted and whatever life I was going to lead, I had to sort of like determine that I had to create it. So I almost built an identity based on the type of person I wanted to be, and started living that. I don't know, I'm not saying that I wasn't that person, but I wanted to be a really good friend. And so I became a really good friend to a cadre of kids. I called the kids my tribe because they were from every, aspect of the spectrum, culturally, racially, socioeconomically. It was such a rich, we were such a rich tribe of people. And, I was sort of, and I wanted to be like really sound and true. And I wanted to be smart, and I wanted to be a good student, and I wanted to be an athlete. That didn't work out too well, but I sort of created the person I wanted to be. And by the time I got to high school, like, the sort of identity surrounded what I created, as opposed to what everybody else was creating in my mind, because I didn't have this mother, this absence. And I think I was trying to fill the absence, because I've always felt the absence, but I was never searching for the woman, because I never thought the woman was the possibility. And I had all these other women in my life who were filling that void. So when my dad, I think when you're a child that is being raised and nurtured by so many people, you feel a sense of betrayal if you're like yearning for something else out there. So it was like this. I don't think I ever yearned for her. I yearned to know, but I didn't really feel like I could go in search of, until my dad said, go find her. Gotcha. That was a really long answer to your
no
question.
No, it's a great answer. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World Real Talk. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment, and we're going to pick up in Michelle's story after her dad said, go find your mother, what that search entailed and what came out of that. We'll be back in just a moment on your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial. Welcome back to Real World Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. We are talking to Michelle Miller. She is an award-winning journalist and co-host of CBS Saturday Morning, and we're talking about her new book, Belonging. So at 22, you get to the place where, okay, your dad is sick. He has cancer. And he says to you, I'm sure it was a very serious conversation, hey, you need to go find your mother.
Right. And he was looking at it from the medical aspect. Any issues you might have genetically, you need to know about those. And she's the other side of the coin. And I'm sure he was looking at his own mortality and thinking, okay, well, here are the things, from my side, you need to go find out from hers.
Okay. Were you able to find her? Was it an easy process, an easy task, or was it difficult?
Well, it was easy because I didn't know it was going to be easy, but I shared my story with a friend of mine who actually turns out, I went to Howard University with him, and it turns out that he was my distant cousin through that very person I was explaining about in Birmingham, Alabama. Remember, I
Wow.
told you at the beginning, right? And he was always so fascinated by the story that when I expressed to him what my father had said to me, he said, "I can help you find her. Do you have a birthday?"
And you were like, huh?
Really? He said, "Yeah." It didn't
Wow.
hurt that he was a police officer.
Okay. So,
So he ran a check and he found her.
wow.
And it was just like that. One day I gave I gave him her name, uh and the next day I had a phone number.
Okay.
And I called her on the phone, and I want folks to read the book,
Well, they're
but
going to read the book. They're going to read the book. This is the Cliff Note version.
yeah, no, I contacted her, and it's interesting. I was talking to Gail King when she interviewed me for the 92nd Street Y. We did a Q&A, and she's hilarious. She said, Michelle, she said, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's just mad at you. And I said, really? She said, yeah. So after you find her, she basically is like, listen, I'll answer any questions. You can have my number. But, the idea that I wanted to have some sort of relationship when it was pretty clear she wanted to keep me at a distance, that I kept coming back and not accepting what her desire was. He just said, she told you what it was going to be. And it was interesting to hear someone else's perspective. And having been through this process, not only writing the book, but also talking to so many different people, it really has been an eye-opening process, even in the process, right? As I'm going through it, to say, whoa, I guess I didn't take, that into light. I was only looking at what I needed, right? And so, I did find her. I did ask her the questions about my health and genetics. And I was actually fine in that moment with having just sort of this distant relation. It wasn't even a relationship, but just sort of, I have any questions, I can give you a call. When it really hit me emotionally, because I seemed to understand what she had gone through. And the story was this: she met my dad in a moment, in a season of understanding who she was as a Mexican American, in the midst of the civil rights era for so many people in this country, whether you were Black or Hispanic or Asian American or part of the LGBTQ community. The civil rights movement was a movement that ushered in so much opportunity and voice, gave so much voice to so many different people. And she was a part of it. She was experiencing that. And she met my dad. They worked at the hospital together. They fell in love in the process of this discovery. And when her parents, who were working class, I don't know if they were first generation or if they were immigrants themselves, but they thought or assumed that the best way to the American dream was assimilation. That I think that is the most sympathetic approach to a viewpoint to what was happening. And I believe it was her brother who was more of a divider, more of a stereotyper, who said to her, it's us or him. They didn't know he was married. They just knew he was Black. And she had a choice. The time she was pregnant with me. So the choice was to conceal her pregnancy, to conceal the birth of this child, to hand me over to my father, and then to live this life. Actually, she lived the next 2 to 3 years in my father's life until the point at which, and my father never, ever discussed with me what had actually happened. I'm only hearing her side over the years. And so, she eventually married someone else and helped to raise someone else's 6 children. And in that process, some 10 years after I met her and after having my own children, my own son, the fact that she never, when I spoke to her and I told her that I moved to New York, the fact that she never asked me about my son, after, I just was so hurt by that. Never acknowledging my son after talking about her grandchildren, her step grandchildren. I just was so struck by that. I think that was when it really hit me that I needed this sense of acknowledgement, not for myself as much as my children. And that's what led to this, sort of need to have acknowledgement and understanding that it mattered, because it mattered to them.
So one of the things that psychologists and sociologists tell us is that people have an innate need to belong. You were fine before you met her. You meet her, and it's almost like, based on what you're saying, it's almost like this rejection.
The rejection didn't come. No, the rejection for me, it was like those 10 years in between. I was fine. I was like, I met her. I understand the circumstances. I can't blame her. The rejection of my children, that's what did it.
Yeah. Did at that point Mama Bear come out and go, oh,
I think so.
Like, I know you just didn't.
I was, and then it took another 10 years for me to be, to verbalize like that to her. And really at that point it was, I wouldn't recommend the way I did things. There was a latent expression of anger. I would say, I don't know how I feel about my reaction. It's funny. It's like, it's how I reacted. I said some things that that were true, but I think I was too honest about things. And
what was her response to that? Did she acknowledge it? Did she recognize?
I think it was a question. I said, I think it's time for you to tell your family you have this daughter and you have this bloodline. Right? Because she never had any other children. And she said, I can't do that. They would not understand. They would think I was a liar. And you know what I said?
No, what did you say?
I said, well, in some way, shape, or form, we all are, but you definitely are. Because you're concealing something for so long and you don't have to anymore.
Yeah.
If I understood the circumstances in which you had to give up your own blood, I don't understand why they wouldn't. And I would feel as though they would have to, because they're part of the reason you did it. The guilt of their racism, I would assume, would come out, but I don't know. I think she knew her family better than perhaps I did.
Well, and I think the other issue is not just her family, but her marriage.
No, everyone, her mother and father were dead by then. One had Alzheimer's, and one was
but I'm
dead.
talking about her
and
husband.
Her husband was dead. So I didn't make any of these. I didn't make any demands on her until after her husband was dead. This is her brother and her sister and her stepchildren.
So I'm sure there must have been some kind of pretending on her part that she was something that she was not. Even something as sensitive as the relationship or her perception of African American people, or things that were told that you kind of pretend like it's not an issue, now somebody would go, wait a minute, hold on, you what? So I'm sure there must have been some underlying things that.
Yeah, no, I think that she lives in a world that probably would not be accepting in that way. And, we, and there lies the sort of complex parable of our society that we're still grappling with. We want to pretend like we've dealt with some of the issues of racism and slavery and segregation and redlining and all these other policies that were inflicted upon people based on the color of their skin or their country of origin or their sexual orientation, whatever it is that we place on it. We try and pretend like as a society we've dealt with it when we really haven't.
Yeah.
In great number, the systemic issues that we're dealing with just keep perpetuating. I hate to say it like this hatred, this misunderstanding, this divide. And no one can argue that we aren't in a moment, or certainly a continuum, a pendulum shift and swing of that.
So as you have looked at your journey and all that it's taken you through, how has this journey changed you?
I think it's just exposed me in a way, or exposed people to who I am. It's made me more transparent. I think people see me for who I am and see me in a different light. I think people made assumptions about who I was and what I lived through. And I'll never forget one of my bosses. I won't say which one or what city, but she said, you remind me of my sister. And I said, and how's that? Oh, she was the pretty one. She was the one, everything was perfect about her. Everything went right for her, And I looked at her and I was like, oh, you don't know me at all. I said, one, I always believe we live as our 13-year-old selves. Like we still can't get out of that. But my 13-year-old self really didn't, we're in that awkward stage.
Sure.
I was not pretty at 13. And I said, and you clearly don't know my life. And I remember I saw her after I wrote my book and she came up to me and she said, man, I had no idea. And I think we as people don't have any idea about the people sometimes we're sitting right across from. We make assumptions based on what we do or don't know.
Sure.
And it leads us down a path in which we can't really be sometimes fair to who they are. And we can't be, we're judgmental.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. No, absolutely. I think I was just talking to somebody and I want to share this line with you, and I'd like to get your response to it. He said to me, when you become yourself, you will have to reintroduce yourself to yourself. Like when you get to this place of enlightenment, self-enlightenment, realization, that you have to first start by reintroducing yourself to yourself. And then you might have to reintroduce yourself to some other people as well.
Well, I think it's a constant evolution because you're always in a state of change and growth, hopefully.
Yeah.
And sometimes we backtrack. Have you ever found yourself backtracking?
Sure. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. That is so embarrassing.
Why is that embarrassing?
Because you think, oh, I've been enlightened. I've grown so much. And you do something so stupid and so outside of the realm of this, I guess it's like life. It's like you're moving forward and then something hits and then you backtrack. You're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, how did I let that happen?
Mm.
I don't mean it's different from a pivot. It's different from being, backed up. It's when you are the source of your own
Sure.
stumble.
Yeah. Yeah. So where are you now in this journey of belonging?
Where?
Yeah. Where are you now? You've.
I am in a state of I'm writing another book for
Okay.
kids because so much of I found all of the search of who we are that begins in that elemental stage of that I would say from 10 to 14. And so much of I am sure who I decided to be in the absence of what I felt that might have been missing, because I took a stand and I said, I want this direction and I want this height. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know, what profession I was going to go in. I just knew that I wanted to be happy. I knew that I wanted to live a life that meant something. I knew I wanted to be productive. And so it was like a choice I made to move in that direction. And I think that a lot of young people make the wrong turn because they don't know that they're in control, because they feel as though they are in a state of moving in a direction, that a path that has been determined for them because everyone expects them to move in that path, whether or not it's good for them. And
So
so I think I just want to showcase, yeah, you can stumble and fall and backtrack, but as long as you keep pointing in that direction and decide for yourself, this is what I want, you can move mountains. You can become that which you don't think is possible. And I think kids don't think people make mistakes and succeed. I don't think kids think that people fail and then can succeed. That failure is part of the road to success. Getting back up. One of my favorite sayings is, a setback is nothing but a setup for a comeback. That is like a motto. Don't look at it like this. Turn it over and keep moving, and move in the direction that you hope to get to.
So how has this impacted you as a mother, as a wife, grandmother? Like how has this affected you in terms of what you have been determined to create for your own family and setting a tone for the generations that come?
I think it's certainly enlightened my children. I don't think our children know as much about who we are. It's still much of a mystery. So it's given them, a glimpse into who I am as mom, as a person. I think my husband, I just like, my husband's very proud that I've told this story. And my professional self, I would just have to say that it has exposed me and put me in a level of transparency that I think people appreciate. And it has only been a positive, in this moment, positive experience for me, when there was a lot of trepidation as to what might come as a result of me being so exposed.
So we started the interview talking about your looking at your life, this whole issue of being raised in this village, right? This place of love, this place of tremendous nurturing that you literally built the foundation of your life upon. Now, as you look at belonging, give our audience a message for somebody who may not be, as you said, have this story of tragedy to triumph. They may not have these extremes, but as you described it, this kind of from the middle to the top, so to speak, right? Although I think looking back and hearing your story, there were places where you could have gotten derailed. There are places where you could have gotten off track. But encourage somebody today who's listening, who their story may not be that drastic, but it's still been tough enough that they haven't walked in to the place of fulfilling their potential and making that decision. Encourage somebody today as you look at your own life and kind of help somebody see their life through that lens to see what they can do and what they can be.
Well, everyone's path is their own. And, everyone has a different set of barriers and challenges. But what I will say is that the life before you is a life you can create. The path you choose is a path that if you ask for help, if you reach out and literally ask for help, you will receive it. And I did that a lot. I leaned on a lot of people. I didn't do any of this by myself. And I think probably the best piece of advice I would give to people is to be open to receiving assistance in achieving the dream or dreams or accomplishments or the destination or the journey, more importantly, the journey that you desire. Because no one gets anywhere by themselves. And I think that the message in the book, and my message is, a lot of people helped me get to where I am today. And I thank them and I'm grateful for them. And I continue to put people in my life and hope encourage people coming behind me to be open to the best and to also understand that the challenges will continue and it will continue to be a struggle, but it's worth it. It is worth it.
Well, let me just conclude by asking you this. Are you good?
I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
I'm good.
No, and I think, and the reason I ask you that is because I think for a lot of people who are listening, you'll never necessarily complete the journey. You're always on the journey.
Exactly. Oh, you so hear me.
Yeah. But just getting to a place where it's not negative. It's another and a new expression, but you're good. You're at a healthy place and going through this.
I think that life deals us a lot of things that we may not agree with, that, we had hoped to gone a different way, that didn't turn out the way we wanted. And that goes for that, that's whether it's relationships, whether it's events in your life, or it is moments of opportunity. And I think, being okay with the journey, finding that I'm good, is that's the battle won, because so much we can't change and so much we have to learn to deal with.
Michelle Miller, the author of Belonging. I heard that you are going to be in Houston, Texas in the next week.
Okay, please please follow me on Michelle Miller 29. That's my Instagram page. It is, that's the best way to find out what I'm up to.
Michelle Miller 29. You want to find out where she's going to be. And here's what I'm going to tell you something. Don't tell anybody. Well, you can tell somebody else. You can see her in person in Houston this upcoming week. Michelle Miller 29. That's her IG address. And you can follow her and get the book. I promise you, it'll bless you. Listen, if you don't think the book will bless you, just read a summary of the book. And I promise you, it'll bless you, because it is really the story of overcoming, of, taking, some people would say, lemons and making lemonade, and how the journey just continues, because what we don't get over, we get through, we continue to work through, and we continue to become the best that we can possibly be. Michelle Miller, thank you so much for being with us on Real World, Real Talk.
Thank you.
The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And the fight for your own sense of mental health and wellness and inner peace, there's no greater fight to engage in. Getting to a place where, as we discuss, you're good. And sometimes we give that up because we're so concerned about pleasing other people, or we're concerned about the opinions of other people, instead of just locking in on who we are and being the best that we can possibly be. And so I want to encourage you to know it's never too late to get on that journey to healing, to get on that journey to wholeness. Take responsibility for your own well-being. I love what Michelle said. The life before you is the life you can create. So whatever was in your past, you're in charge of creating what it's going to be in your future. This is Dr. DZ Cofield for Real World, Real Talk, signing off. You're listening to your member-supported radio station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. Stay tuned for Truth with David Goldstein and V. Michael McKay. Until next time, God bless is my prayer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info@rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.